Hi there, I'm Pastor John from New Life Assembly, and we have been talking about the book of Deuteronomy. We've covered 4 chapters already, and today we're going to hit chapter 5. Chapter 5 is all about the law of Moses. It's all about what God wants his people to do. And so the law is very action-oriented. It has to do with what we do and how we do it and how it glorifies God. The law talks about God's holiness, it talks about his righteousness, and it shows us how far from his holiness and his righteousness we really truly are. And so as we look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, we are really going to focus on the law. And I want to start out by showing you, if I may, just a little bit of a chart here that will help us to understand some of what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about the law. The Mosaic Law. It's really important for our understanding of the Old and New Testaments to clearly delineate what exactly is encompassed by Mosaic Law. Mosaic Law, most scholars will agree, is broken up into 3 different ways of viewing it. And so let's start with the law itself. So you see the law, and it is broken up into 3 different segments as you go through the understanding that we would have of the law. The first understanding is that of moral law. The moral law is things like the 10 Commandments. There are other moral laws as well throughout the Old Testament Mosaic Law. The law itself contains somewhere around 613 to 600, and I believe it's 17 or 19. It depends on which ones you include and all of that, but about 613 laws altogether. Now, of those 613, there are 3 different ways to look at them. The first is, of course, moral law. This deals with our ethics and holiness and what God expects of us all the time. So, for instance, murdering, adultery, the 10 Commandments basically, and some others would be falling under the moral law. One of the tests that you have for moral law is that moral law is all the time law. Whether the Israelites are living in Egypt, or they're in the wilderness, or they're in the promised land, or they're in the exile, or whether they're New Testament believers, all of these moral laws will still be in place. So moral law is usually attested to in both Testaments, the New and the Old. And so that kind of shows you moral law. There's another type of segment of laws in Mosaic Law, and that is laws of civic nature. Civic laws are a little bit different than moral laws because civic laws have to do with Israel in the land. How will they react to having land? Remember that Israel and Egypt did not really even own their property by the time of Moses. While in Joseph's time, when Joseph brought the Israelites down at the end of Genesis to Egypt, they owned the land of Goshen. By the time of Exodus, 400 years later, they are just slaves in the land. They don't really own it. It's Pharaoh's land, and he uses them like a workforce. And he enslaves them. He is the taskmaster. And so they didn't really have any civic laws. For instance, these would be sort of like, for instance, we live here in the borough of Shillington. The borough has certain rules or laws for our church that we need to follow. Some of them are, for instance, you can't add to your parking lot unless we say so, or when you do your parking lot this way, the water has to flow that way, or, if your roof is falling apart, you have to fix it by X amount of days. These are civic laws. They're laws that deal with stewardship of the land and the people of God, the nation itself. And so they are not like the moral laws. They are not laws that we as Christians follow, because they are for Israel in the land.